Hello students, welcome to Nagesh Karasge Orchid School. Myself Snehal Mane, teaching you science for grade 6. Students, so today we are going to start term 2 syllabus from science, and we are going to start lesson number 9, that is the living organisms and their surrounding. So you know there are different kinds of living organisms in our surrounding. So where do they live, what is their habitat? We are going to learn more in detail about all these living organisms in this lesson. So let us start. See here. Paheli and Buju went on vacation to many places of their interest. One such trip took them to river Ganga in Rishikesh. So they went to a trip or to a vacation. One such trip took them to the river Ganga in Rishikesh. So what do they see and how do they enjoy it in the Rishikesh? They are telling us few things about their trip. They climbed the mountains of the Himalayas where it was very cold. They saw many kinds of trees on these mountains, oaks, pines and devdas, very different from ones near their home on the plains. So there are different kinds of trees in the areas where there are mountains and where there are plains. So these Buju and Paheli were living in the plains. So there were only the kinds of trees which are easily available or which we can see everywhere. But near the mountain they have seen the different kinds of trees like oaks, pines and devdas. In the same way, in yet another trip they travelled to Rajasthan. They again went to the other trip, that is Rajasthan, and moved on camels through the hot desert. They collected different kinds of cactus plants from this trip. So how is the climate of desert? That's very hot. So they moved on camels through the hot desert. They collected different kinds of cactus plants from this trip. Finally, they went on a trip to Puri and visited the sea beach dotted with casuarina trees. While recollecting all the fun that they had on these trips, a thought struck them. All these places were so different from one another. Some were cold, some were hot and dry, and some places were so humid, and yet all of them had many organisms like living creatures of various kinds. They tried to think of a place on earth where there may not be any living creatures. Buju thought of places near his home. Inside the house, he tried the cupboard. He had thought that there may not be any living organisms here, but he found one tiny spider in the cupboard. Outside the home too, there did not seem to be any place he could think of that did not have living creatures of some kind or the other. Paheli started thinking and reading about far away places. She read that people have even found tiny living organisms in the openings of volcanoes. Okay. So this Paheli and Buju, they were on a trip. So in a year or maybe in 2 years they visited many different places. First, where they visited? They visited in Rishikesh. Then they visited in Rajasthan. After that they had a trip to Puri. So in Rishikesh the climate was cold. And in Rajasthan the climate was very hot, and there were different kinds of plants like cactus plants, and at last they visited to Puri, and there the climate was humid because it is lying to the coastline, so the climate was humid. Yet they visited these many different places. They have an idea that the climates was very different from each other, and yet we were having many different living creatures over there. So they are thinking that we have visited this many places, there are different kinds of living organisms. So, shall we find some living organisms in our home? So, they have seen the cupboard. When they open a cupboard, they find the they find a spider. So, spider is also a living creature, and then they went outside, they have seen many different living creatures outside, and then Paheli and Buju were thinking about the places where there would not be any living organisms. So, one of them told them while reading a book that there are few tiny living organisms in the opening of volcanoes. Okay. So, everywhere we have organisms, we have living organisms. Next, now we are going to see about organisms and the surroundings where they live. Another thought that occurred to Paheli and Buju was about the kinds of living organisms that were present in different locations that they had visited. So, then they were thinking about the kinds of living organisms present in different locations. Like in a cold region there are different living organisms, in hot region there are different living organisms, and in humid region also. The desert had camels, the mountains had goats and yak, Puri had some other creatures, crabs on the beach, and such a variety of fish being caught by the fishermen at the sea, right. So, there are different kinds of animals in different areas, and then there did seem to be some creatures like ants that were present in all these different locations. Yeah, instead of being different by the temperature and the climate, there is one same thing they observed, that about the ants were present in all these different locations. The kinds of plants found in each of these regions were so different from the plants of other regions. What about the surrounding in these different regions? Were they the same? Okay. So, instead of being the different region, different temperature, we find the same thing, that is ant. So, let us see an activity. Let us start with the forest. Think of all the plants, animals and objects that can be found there. List them all in column 1. List the things of animals and plants found in the other region that are also shown in the table. You can collect the examples scattered through this chapter to fill in the table 9.1. Now, you can see here the table 9.1. Now, we are going to start with the forest, and you have to fill this table. So, in the forest, what type of animals do you find, what type of plants do you find, or if you observe any other objects, that also you can write. In the same way, in the mountains, plants, animals and different objects, in the desert, in the sea and any other if you observe it. So, we need to complete this table one by one as we go in detail to study about different living organisms. Now, let us see about habitat and adaptations. Habitat and adaptation. See students, habitat is the natural home for an organism, maybe a plant or an animal. Habitat is the place where an organism finds comfort, safety, food, water, air, shelter and suitable conditions for survival and breeding. Since the needs of different organisms are different, naturally their habitat are also different. All the living organisms require different habitat. Habitat provides almost everything to an organism which is needed by it. What do you find from the plants and animals listed in the activity? Did you find a large variety in them? Look at what did you have entered in the column for the desert, column for the sea and different kind of organisms. What are the surroundings like in these two regions? See here, in the sea, plants and animals are surrounded by saline, it means salty water. Most of them use the air dissolved in water. There is very little water available in the desert. There is very little water available in the desert. It is very hot in the day time and very cold at night in the desert. The animals and plants of the desert live on desert soil and breathe air from the surroundings. So, what do they do? The animals and plants of the desert live on the desert soil and breathe air from the surrounding. The sea and the desert are very different surroundings, and we find very different kinds of plants and animals in these two regions, isn't it? Let us look at two very different kinds of organisms from the desert and the sea. A camel and a fish. From the desert we have taken a camel, and from the sea we have taken a fish. The body structure of a camel helps it to survive in desert conditions. Yeah, so we mostly observe this camel in deserts. Camels have long legs which help to keep their bodies away from the heat and the sand. They excrete small amount of urine. Their dung is dry and they do not sweat. Since camels lose very little water from their bodies, they can live for many days without water. So, they are suitable for which type of climate? Hot climate. So, they are mostly found in the areas like desert. Let us look at different kinds of fish. Some of these are shown here. Let us see that also. There are so many kinds of fish, but do you see that they all have something common about their shape? All the ones shown here have the streamline shape that was discussed in chapter 8. See here. We can see here they have the streamlined shape. They have the streamlined shape. This shape helps them move inside water. Fish have slippery scales on their bodies. These scales protect the fish and also help in easy movement through water. That fish have flat fins and tails that help them to change directions and keep their body balanced in water. Gills present in the fish help them to use oxygen dissolved in water. We see that the features of a fish help it to live inside water, and the features of a camel help it to survive in the desert. So, these two different animals which are suitable, like fish is suitable for the sea and the camel is suitable for the desert. They have some features that they help for the animals to survive in a particular area. Different plants and animals live in different surroundings. Fish live in water. Water is the habitat for fish. Can you imagine of a fish without water? Similarly, you cannot think lotus growing on sand. Lotus grows in water only. We can say that fish and lotus are aquatic organisms. Fish is an aquatic animal, lotus is an aquatic plant. We have taken only two examples from a very wide variety of animals and plants that live on earth. So, just now we have seen an example of fish and camel, that how they are survived in the particular climate. In all this variety of organisms, we will find that they have certain features that help them live in the surroundings in which they are normally found. The presence of specific features of certain habits which enable a plant or an animal to live in its surrounding is called adaptation. Adaptations. Okay. So, what is adaptation? The presence of specific features. All the animals have one or the other features or the certain habits which enable a plant or an animal to live in its surrounding is called adaptation. Different animals are adapted to their surroundings in different ways. The surroundings where organisms live is called habitat. The surroundings where organisms live is called habitat. The organisms depend for their food, water, air, shelter and other needs on their habitat. Habitat means a dwelling place. It means a home. Several kinds of plants and animals may share the same habitat. The plants and animals that live on land are said to live in terrestrial habitats. Okay. Now we have different types of habitat like terrestrial habitat and aquatic habitat. The plants and animals that live on land are said to live in terrestrial habitats. Some examples of terrestrial habitats are forest, grasslands, desert, coastal and mountain regions. On the other hand, the habitats of plant and animals that live in water are called aquatic habitats. Ponds, swamps, lakes, rivers and oceans are some examples of aquatic habitats. There are large variations in forest, grasslands, deserts, coastal and mountain regions located in different parts of the world. This is true for all aquatic habitat as well. So, students, there are two different types of habitat, that is aquatic habitat and terrestrial habitat. Aquatic habitats are places full of water. Water is the medium for living organisms. Plants and animals which live in water are called the aquatic plants and aquatic animals. Terrestrial or land habitat. Terrestrial habitat are the places on land. Generally, terrestrial plants grow with their roots in soil. The shoot remains in the air. Animals live on the land with their body in air. Plants and animals living on land are called terrestrial organisms. A plant or an animal that lives in water cannot survive on land. Plants and animals that live on land cannot survive in water. This is because each organism has adapted itself to its own surroundings. A fish lives in water, cow, goat and dog live on land. A camel finds it convenient to live in the desert. Birds live on trees and polar bear in snowy regions. The ability of living things to adjust themselves to their surrounding is called adaptation. Adaptation is a process in which the living things, it means the organisms, change to be able to live comfortably with the change in environmental conditions. So, with the changes happening in the environment, the organisms adapt their surroundings and live there. Now, let us move to our next concept. The living things such as plants and animals in a habitat are its biotic components. Various non-living things such as rocks, soil, air and water in the habitat constitute its abiotic components. Sunlight and heat also form abiotic components of the habitat. Biotic, it means the living component, and abiotic, it means the non-living component or the living and non-living things. We know that some plants grow from seeds. Let us look at some abiotic factors and their effects on seeds as they grow into young plants. So, we have seen an activity in the previous class. We made sprouts from moong and chana seeds. When the seeds turned into a sprout, it germinated. It starts germinated. This was the beginning of a new plant from the seed. It was the beginning of a new plant. Collect some dry moong seeds, keep a small heap of seeds aside and soak the rest in water for a day. Divide the soaked seeds into 4 parts. Keep one part completely submerged in water for 3 to 4 days. Do not disturb the dry seed and those submerged in water. Keep one part of the soaked seed in a sunny room and another in a completely dark region like a cupboard that does not allow any light to come in. Keep the last part in very cold surrounding, say in a refrigerator or with ice around them. Set these 3 parts to germinate by rinsing them and draining the water every day. What do you notice? After a few days, do the seeds in all the 5 parts germinate equally? Do you find slower or no germination in any of this? So, the seeds that are kept in the dark room where there is no sunlight, will they grow? No, they will not grow. So, they require some specific conditions for the growing. Do you find that abiotic factors like air, water, light and heat are important for the growth of plant? So, students, just now we have seen about the biotic factors and abiotic factors. So, seed can be germinated, it means it can grow, it is a biotic component, it is a biotic component. So, the factors like air, water, light and heat which are abiotic, are helpful for the biotic components to grow? Yes, they are very helpful. In fact, these abiotic factors are important for all living organisms. We find that organisms exist in very cold as well as very hot climates and surroundings, isn't it? How do they manage to survive? That is where the adaptation comes in. Adaptation does not take place in a short time. Over thousands of years, the abiotic factors of a region change. Those animals which cannot adapt to these changes die out and only the adapted ones survive. Animals adapt to different abiotic factors in different ways. The result is variety of organisms present in different habitat. Now see here, let us have a journey through different habitats. Let us see one by one in detail. Some terrestrial habitats. We will take a look to desert first. We discuss the abiotic factors of a desert and the adaptation in camel to this. What about the other animals and plants that are found in the desert? Do they have the same kind of adaptations? You can see these are some typical kind of plants that grows in desert like cactus. These are desert animals. These are desert animals like rats and snakes which do not have the long legs like the camel has. To stay away from the intense heat during the day, they stay in burrows deep in the sand. Which animals do they stay in the burrows? They stay, the rats and snakes, because they do not have long legs like camels. These animals come out only during the night when the temperature gets cooler. See, you can see the typical plants here which are grown in the desert. Some parts of the plants as we have seen where we studied the transpiration in plants. In the term 1 we have studied about the transpiration. Leave the potted plant in the sun and observe after a few hours. What do you see? Do you notice any difference in the amount of water collected on the 2 polythene bags? Yes, when a plant is covered with a polythene bag, after some time we see few droplets of water on the bag, polythene bags. Desert plants lose very little water through transpiration. The leaves in the desert plants are either absent or very small, or they are present in the shape of spines. This helps in reducing loss of water from the leaves through transpiration. Thus, cactus is the plant which adapts its surrounding for the survival. The leaf-like structure you see in cactus is its stem. Photosynthesis in these plants is usually carried out by the stems. The stem is also covered with a thick waxy layer which helps to retain water. Most desert plants have roots that go very deep into the soil for absorbing water. Okay, so now we have seen about the desert. So there are few animals and plants that adapt those conditions that are present in the desert and they are able to survive in the area. Now we are going to see about mountain regions. These habitats are normally very cold and windy. These habitats are normally very cold and windy. In some areas, snowfall may take place in winter. There is also snowfall in few places in winter in the mountainous region. There is a large variety of plants and animals living in the mountain regions. Have you seen the kind of trees shown in the figure 9.6? So, see, these are the trees which are found in the mountainous region. If you live in a mountain region or have visited one, you may have seen a large number of such trees. But have you ever noticed such trees naturally growing in the other regions? How are these trees adapted to the conditions prevailing in their habitat? These trees are normally cone shaped. How are these trees? Cone shaped, and they have the sloping branches. They have the sloping branches. The leaves of these trees are needle like. They have the leaves like needle. This helps the rainwater and snow slide off very easily. There could be trees with shapes of very different from these plants that are also present on the mountains. They may have different kinds of adaptations to survive on the mountains. Okay. So, in the mountainous region we find animals, different types of plants, like the plants are cone shaped, and if the snow or the rain falls, as the leaves are in the slope manner, so it is easy, the rain or the snow gets, it can just easily go away. Now we will see about the animals. Animals living in the mountain regions also adapted to the conditions. Yeah. So, in the mountain regions, how is the climate? Cold. So, animals also adapt to the changes according to the conditions. They have the thick skin or fur to protect them from cold. The animals have the thick fur. For example, yaks have long hair to keep them warm. Snow leopard has thick fur on its body. Snow leopard has also thick fur on its body. Yak also has thick fur. They are specially adapted for the mountainous regions, including feet and toes. This protects feet from the cold when it walks on the snow. They also have a thick fur on its feet and toes because to protect them from the cold when they walk on the snow. The mountain goat has strong hooves for running up the rocky slopes of the mountains. As we go up in the mountainous regions, the surroundings change as we see different kinds of adaptation at different heights. We see different kinds of adaptations at different heights. So, students, till now we have seen about the different habitat, where do the different animals live, where do the plants survive according to their natural habitat and their surrounding. Let us move towards the next topic, like we can see about the grasslands and plains, how are the plants and animals grow there, how do they survive there with different special features in the next class. Thank you, students.